Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tombstone Tourist. This episode will be of particular interest to the fans of the Andy Griffith Show. It was one of my favorite shows growing up, and I'm not ashamed to say I still watch it today. In one of my earlier videos, I actually visited Mount Airy, North Carolina, which was the inspiration for the fictional town of Mayberry. But not many people realize that some of the show's main characters actually made their homes here in North Carolina. Andy Griffith, the show's namesake and main character, was born in Mount Airy and later lived in Manteo over on the Outer Banks. Betty Lynn, who played Deputy Barney Fife's girlfriend, retired to Mount Airy and actually still lives here today. She's 94 years old, and as her health will allow, she still makes an occasional appearance at the Andy Griffith Museum. But our destination today, Siler City, North Carolina. Yes, there really is a Siler City. On the show, Siler City and Mayberry were only a few miles apart, but in reality, about 80 miles separates Mount Airy from Siler City. Just like that, here we are at the corner of Elk Street, South Evergreen Avenue in Siler City, North Carolina. And this is the former home of Francis Bavier, who played the beloved character of Aunt Bee on the Andy Griffith Show. After the show ended, Francis said she was so typecast that it was impossible for her to find work. So in 1972, she retired from acting and bought this house here in Siler City. Francis lived here for the last 17 years of her life. When she ventured out to shop or for appointments, someone would eventually recognize her and call her Aunt Bee, which she absolutely hated. She had very few friends here, and her neighbors saw her only occasionally, and when they did, it was only a quick wave or a nod of the head. Eventually, she appeared in public less and less, choosing to stay home with just her cats, which sometimes numbered as many as 20. Francis lived in this house from 1972 until her death in 1989. After her death, the house was sold, and over the years, it has had several owners. And today, there's once again a for sale sign hanging out front. But it's still a pretty popular place for fans to visit. One of the neighbors who was out walking his dog told me that hardly a day goes by that someone doesn't stop, jump out, and take a quick picture. When she died in 1989, there was a short graveside service held in nearby Oakwood Cemetery. None of the cast of the Andy Griffith Show attended, and only a few residents of Siler City was present as Francis Bavier was laid to rest. It was just a short 5-minute drive from the home of Francis Bavier to Oakwood Cemetery, where she's buried. Like her former home that we just visited, people still stop and visit her grave. As I arrived, there were 5 or 6 people at her gravesite, and I had to patiently wait until they finished with their visit. Francis was born in New York City, where as a young woman she became quite the accomplished actress. She first appeared in vaudeville and later moved to the Broadway stage. When motion pictures became popular, Francis left the comfort of New York and moved to California, where she made the transition from the stage to the silver screen. Then in the 1950s, something called television came along, and Francis once again had to make an adjustment from the big screen to the small screen. Her big break came when she had a small part of the TV show Make Room for Daddy, which starred Danny Thomas, and on one episode featured Ron Howard and Andy Griffith. That episode of Make Room for Daddy was actually the pilot for what would become the Andy Griffith Show. When casting began for the Andy Griffith Show, Andy remembered Francis, and she was cast for the role of Aunt Bee, and she would stay with the show for its entire 8-year run. She was also the only one of the original cast members that stayed with the spinoff Mayberry RFD. It has been well documented over the years that Francis and Andy were not particularly close, and often had their differences on the set. A few years back, I had the opportunity to attend the Mayberry Days Festival in Mount Airy, and was able to talk with a couple people who appeared on the show a couple of times in non-speaking roles. They told me that Andy wasn't the only person Francis clashed with. She often clashed with George Lindsay, who played Goober. Francis wanted to do the scene and move on, but George, on the other hand, was a prankster and would often ad-lib his lines. His constant pranks and not following lines would so infuriate Francis that she would storm off the set. As I said earlier, Francis never really embraced the character of Aunt Bee, and when the show ended, she felt that she was so typecast that it was impossible for her to find work. So she retired and moved here to Siler City, where she lived the final 17 years of her life. Basically, she lived the life of a recluse. Her only companions were her many cats. She spent her days working with several charities and reading her fan mail. She insisted on personally answering all of her fan mail, often writing long and inspirational letters to those who took time to write her. Francis Bavier, the lady that we all know and love as Aunt Bee, died at the age of 86 on December 6, 1989. While visiting the grave of Francis Bavier, I noticed the people that were here when I arrived left a jar of pickles, an obvious reference to the episode where Aunt Bee tries her luck at making homemade pickles. Her kerosene cucumbers were not a hit. With that, I'm going to wrap up my visit to the former home and final resting place of Francis Bavier here in Siler City, North Carolina. If you have a favorite memory or favorite episode of the Andy Griffith Show, be sure to leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up below. If you want to keep up with all of my travels, be sure to ring that bell and subscribe. For now, I just want to remind you, life's short, so enjoy the journey. Until next time, I'll see you down the road. So long, everyone.